Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to the Rare Book Room. Apologies about the slightly late start. We just wanted to get all our ducks in a row, but thank you for your patience. This ought to be a really good show tonight. My name is Nicholas. I help direct the events here at Strand Bookstore. For a little bit of history, the Strand was founded in 1927 by the Bass family over on 4th Avenue's Book Row, stretching from Union Square to Astor Place. Book Row gradually dwindled as big box stores such as Amazon and ebooks took hold. After almost 90 years, Strand is the sole survivor, still run by the Bass family and still housing new and used books, some in this room from the 15th century. Pretty cool. Tonight, it is my tremendous honor to introduce Ignatz, Harvey, and Eisner Award-winning comics giant and one of my personal artistic heroes, Jaime Hernandez, for the launch of his newest collection of Love and Rockets vignettes, Is This How You See Me? Together with his brothers Gilbert and Mario, Jaime co-created the Love and Rockets comic in 1981, which Gilbert and Jaime continue to this day. Love and Rockets has since evolved into one of the great bodies of American literary fiction, spanning 4 decades and countless high watermarks in the medium's history. In 2017, Jaime, along with Gilbert, was introduced into the Will Eisner Comic Book Hall of Fame, and in 2018, he released his first children's book, the Aesop Book Prize-winning The Dragon Slayer, Folktales from Latin America. His work has held a special place in my heart for years, and I can't wait to dive into what will undoubtedly be a bittersweet reunion of Maggie, Hopey, and the rest of the Huerta punk group we've all come to love. Joining Jaime in conversation this evening is Michelle Hart, assistant books editor of O, the Oprah Magazine. In addition to being awarded a fiction fellowship by the New York State Writers Institute, her writing has appeared on The Millions, The Rumpus, New Yorker, and many more. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Michelle, Jaime, and Is This How You See Me to the Strand.
Hi.
Oh, hi.
I'm going to read another introduction, if that's okay. That was great, though, Nick. Where to begin? The amount of ground that Love and Rockets has broken over the past 40 years could split the earth in two. In terms of both comic craft and content, the series has never been anything less than bold. The Spartan line work, the expressiveness of the characters, as vivid as a live-action film, the genuine, pitch-perfect dialogue, the expansive and indelible cast. That's not to mention the representation within its pages of a polychromatic Latinx community, of queer people, and I can't believe I have to say this in 2019, of women. It's difficult to overstate how important Jaime's Locust stories have been for so many people and for so long. For almost 40 years, the series has shown what the medium as a whole is capable of, the kind of magic that can happen when people, particularly from marginalized communities, are put in charge of their own work and their own stories. Time magazine included Jaime and Gilbert in its top 100 21st century innovators. Wizard magazine, RIP, named Hopey and Maggie on their list of the top 100 comic book characters of all time. And then Rolling Stone ranked Love and Rockets as the greatest non-superhero graphic novel of all time, saying, imagine The Clash or REM or Run DMC not only never broke up, but for 30 years, never once released a less than excellent record. Imagine their command of craft just became more pronounced year after year, earning the unshakable admiration of their fans and peers. Imagine they made the best record of their career 30 years on, this decade. This is essentially what Jaime and Gilbert Hernandez have done with Love and Rockets, the greatest American comic book series of all time. End quote. No pressure. Is that the first time you're hearing that quote? Is that the first time you heard that quote?
Maybe not, but I like it.
I'll take credit for it. That's fine. They went on to call The Love Bunglers, a stone cold masterpiece. And now Jaime's back with another bona fide classic, a standalone story that sees Maggie and Hopey attempt to recapture their punk rock glory days. It's an incredibly poignant meditation on aging that's also fun as all hell, a rowdy requiem for lost loves and past lives. So, once again, Jaime Hernandez. So,
Thank you for that.
So I'm going to talk just a bit more. Let me start by saying that how much of a thrill this is for me personally. In my day job at Oprah Magazine, I don't often get to cover comics and graphic novels. So, when Jack and Fantagraphics asked me to do this, I nearly fainted. So with that in mind, I want to read a quote from the novelist Marlon James in a conversation he recently had with Victor Laval, another novelist, for New York Magazine. James talked about growing up in Jamaica or under the influence of British colonialism, which meant reading only those stuffy white dude novels that are deemed important. He said, quote, "Despite it being impressed on me that this over here is literature and this over here is comics are something different, I grew up refusing to distinguish between them. I am getting the same feeling from Love and Rockets that I'm getting from 100 Years of Solitude, but I'm supposed to look at one as comics and the other as a serious novel? From an early age, I thought, that's bullshit." So I guess my first question is, does this sort of literary versus non-literary, or the literariness of comics, does that influence the way that you write? Does prose literature influence the way you write?
Not really. I was raised on comics. I've always been a terrible reader. But I'll take it.
Yeah.
No, I learned early on that my pictures help my words and my words help my pictures. So I would rather
Right.
I like that in between kind of thing.
Yeah. Do you is there any credence, or do you just, like Marlon James, think it's bullshit that there's sort of this bifurcation of like literature and then comics?
Right. I think it's bull. I think there's just as many good graphic novels that belong next to good non-drawn
Right.
novels. But then there's that part of me that, since I grew up a comic book kid, that's like, leave us alone. This is our thing.
Okay.
Kind of thing. You guys can be taken seriously when you're dead. Just let us have our thing.
So, like, as far as origin stories go, having a mother who read comic books is very rare. I think. What was it like to have her be the one to introduce you to the medium? Did hearing her talk about comics or reading the ones she loved influence the way you thought about them? Yeah,
well, it kind of in a way romanticized them.
Okay.
She talked about comics like The Spirit and Captain Marvel and Black Hawk and things like that. Just so romantically, almost like they were movie stars.
Okay.
And one time when we were little and we were learning how to draw, I come from a family of 5 boys and a girl, and we all drew. So we're all drawing, and then Mom comes out with this stack of drawings that she did when she was a teenager, and she goes, "I did these," and we were just like, "What?" And what she did was she just drew her favorite superheroes, copied from the comics, but she did them like these portraits. She'd go, "That's the Black Terror," and we'd go, Who's that? Yet they were like these movie star portraits,
Right.
And so it just made superheroes seem so or comics seem so just romantic and cool, and so it just stirred us up more that comics were a cool thing.
I forgot my question. One of the most striking things I think about your work is the way that the characters are drawn, right? No one suffers from same-face-itis. You have such a vast cast of characters, and yet every individual is so easily identifiable. Speedy Ortiz and that unibrow. But also, very few of the women are drawn as bodacious or stick thin and bodacious at the same time. Maggie in particular has a body that strikes me as very real. When did you decide, or did you decide consciously to say, I'm not going to draw women in this very idealized way that I've seen in comics. I'm going to draw them the way that they are in real life.
Yeah, it came gradually. The more I learned how to draw better or whatever, I started to notice things that I was copying from. That some person's arm is thicker than others. Some, just basic stuff like that. But early on in the comic, when this was 1981, and there was no alternative market. There was stuff here and there. Raw was being published, Weirdo, things scattered about, but. When we did Love and Rockets, we threw our whole lives of what we've been drawing our whole lives into this one thing, and realizing, like, I want to make a character like this because there's not one like this in comics. And it was just like an open canvas, right. Especially in the comic world, and even in the TV world and some movies. Yeah. You just didn't not get people from different backgrounds and stuff, and we kind of took advantage of that. Like, you mean we can make a gay character and that'll be new? It's like, oh, okay, well, let's do it. Right. It was kind of that cocky and like, we'll show you how to do comics, man. And so drawing women also, for me, that was another way, like, well, I'm going to make this woman this way because you don't see that in the X-Men, right. Or something like that. So yeah, that's basically where it came from, and I love drawing women, so I got to draw all kinds of women. Right. I didn't just have my poster girl, right, that I wanted to draw all the time. Yeah. So. Yeah, that's basically, and it was just kind of a gradual, natural thing, like, well, if we're drawing our neighborhood, we should show the people in our neighborhood. Right. Yeah.
Do you find that in general that jumpstarts like your creative process, sort of seeing what's not out there and then sort of saying, I want that to be there now?
Yeah, it's just harder now because...
Is it?
It's
Sorry that my voice went up so high.
It's kind of like I thought Maggie and Hopey were very unique. Now you got Maggies and Hopeys on TV. You've got on TV shows. You got them in movies. You got and it's kind of like the new generations watching this stuff don't even know some of it came from Maggie and Hopey. Right. They're influenced by the second or third generation of that. Right. Of that, so I can only hope that I can keep it real. That's my main focus, yeah. And instead of different, because so many things have caught up. Yeah. And I'm not saying we invented everything, right. but just so many comics are coming from this side. Yeah. You find out that there's a group of cartoonists in the smallest city in the United States putting something new out, right. And they just, no one's seen it yet, right? And so all I can do is just keep it as real as I can, you know.
Yeah. So you mentioned keeping it real. Do you find yourself trying to keep it hip, like, or yourself hip? Like, no offense. Do you find that you need to, or want to, or don't want to, read up on, the concepts of gender identity that are out there now, the sort of different kinds of sexualities that have been given names,
Right.
do you find yourself sort of being like, oh, I'm good, or do you think, I probably should learn this?
I think I should at least pay attention.
Okay.
But it's hard to keep up sometimes, and especially when I'm dealing with characters who are already formed,
Right.
and who have their own identity.
Right.
They already dress themselves, I guess.
Right.
If I come up with a new character, I have to think about, I'm drawing a teenager. What do I do? Do I look at what my daughter's up to lately, and then I'll go like, but this isn't the same kind of person who would hang out with my daughter,
Right.
And I think about it, and then sometimes I go, I'll just do a Maggie story.
I think I heard somewhere, like in another interview, where you said sometimes you draw the haircut first. Is that still true?
Yes, sometimes I'll be inspired by someone's haircut, and then I'll create a character around that. A lot of times, I create a character out of someone who will fit a situation.
Okay.
Like, I had real trouble with the comic book I'm doing now, the story I'm doing now. It took a long time because there was one character that had important things to say in it.
Yeah.
That I couldn't fit a character in, and that's rare.
Right.
And I go, well, I don't want to make up one because I've been making up too many. I don't want to confuse people.
Yeah.
I kind of want to use this group of friends, but I couldn't find one to fill it. So I ended up having to change the dialogue to mean the same things, but I was kind of bummed out because I loved the flow of it.
Right.
But nobody would fit it. And finally I just gave in and I said, well, it turned out to be the person they were talking about. It was the person now talking.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's confusing, but that's so. Yeah.
Right. I mean, we were talking back there about this new trick that you've discovered you're able to do, where you're changing your mistakes into plot points. Do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
Because I actually really like that.
Some of my favorite stories I've ever done were from mistakes. Like Love Bunglers came out of a big goof.
What was the goof?
That I had a story about Maggie visiting her family, and I finally showed her brothers.
Okay.
I had shown her sister before, but I wanted to show the whole family. And so I created this family of her sister and 3 brothers. Okay. And I was very happy with it because I go, finally, Maggie has a family. You see what it's like, how she grew up and this and that. And then I just happened to be looking at a really old issue from way back in the 80s, early 80s, and someone mentioned she had 6 kids in her family. And I went, fuck. I went, oh, man. So I thought really fast, and in this one story showing her whole family,
Right.
I have her youngest brother. They're talking about family, and I have the youngest brother going, well, then there's Calvin, who ran away.
Okay.
And I went, they'll believe that, right? and I was like, and he goes, yeah, he ran away, got a girl pregnant or something. So I go, okay, troublemaker. He was misunderstood. He fucked up, and he left. And so I thought, okay, I made the 6th family member. But then I kept thinking, as I was kept doing the the comic, I was thinking like Calvin. So who's Calvin? You know, who is
Right.
this? Who is this brother? And it took me a long time. And then I noticed, I went back to read when they talk about her having 6 in the family. And in that same story, they say, then Maggie moved away for 3 years. And then she moved away when she was 10, came back when she was 13. And I thought, wow, 10 to 13, that's a pretty big growing up era for Maggie.
Right.
You know, so what happened, you know? And then I just started putting 2 and 2 together, and
Right.
and I created Browntown for In
Right.
Love Bunglers. And it was one of those stories that, you know, my pen jumped off my hand and did
Wrote
it itself.
sort of,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I was just like, wow, it worked. You know?
Yeah, it did.
Yeah. So.
You know, the story's 40 years in the making. You know, you're bound to make mistakes, right? And I'm sure that wasn't the first one. You know, how do you keep it straight in your head or externally? You know, do you have like, I imagine like a clothesline just with story notes? You probably don't do that.
No, because I couldn't find them. You know, I would write something down and then I wouldn't know where I left it. It usually just swims in my head, and if I forget something, it's gone. You know, because I never wrote it down or something.
Right.
I'm
like
trying.
even continuity things, you know, like the brothers, you know, is it just like, oh, you know, if I make a mistake or forget something, I can always flub it later.
I don't rely on that. But even if it, like back in that same old story, they say, oh, and then Izzy went away. She went to Mexico, and then she came back a weirdo.
Right.
People at comic book conventions would come up to me and go, what happened to Izzy in Mexico? And I was like, I don't know. but then I wrote Flies on the Ceiling from that, you know, so.
I mean, that's just the mark of such vivid, interesting characters that people are making up or curious about what's going on when they're not on the page, right? That's so rare,
Yeah.
you know. I mean, I read a lot of books for my job, and, you know, I hardly ever find myself thinking about what are the characters up to? You know, what are they doing right now? You know, when I'm not reading them. I mean, that feels really weird to do, but, you know, and, you know, Love and Rockets, you know, when people come up to you at conventions and sort of, that has to feel awesome, right?
Right. It's, you know, and in a way, I remember, keep things to remember is also, I think about, well, Maggie has a family, and like my friends down the street had a family. I knew all his brothers and sisters.
Right.
So if I think about them, I remember each one of their names. The order they. So I do that with my characters too. Like I think of Maggie's family, like, oh, her brother. I wonder what the 2 oldest are up to. You know.
Yeah, right. You know, so the series is not only centered on these incredible dynamic women, but also in some cases skewers what's now referred to as toxic masculinity. You know, this sort of hyper macho-ness. You know, like there's one story that I really like where Ray goes out and gets drunk with a gay man, and you know, the character of Ray is great, you know, and he has this sort of like 40s noirish Raymond Chandler voice to him, you know, this super like stone cold masculine voice in his narration. And in this story, he goes out and he gets drunk, and, you know, he pursues women that he sees at the bar with this like very sort of like cartoonish masculinity, you know, trying to pick them up. And then he ends up
fails every time.
Yeah, right. And then he ends up, you know, blacking out, and at the end realizing that he had a sexual encounter with the man, you know? And it's just such a shocking and like really deftly done sort of twist, right? That sort of seems to me a comment on that sort of hyper masculinity, you know, and the death of Speedy, that whole arc in one sense can be read as, you know, this one-upsmanship that men constantly play with one another, you know, who's more masculine than the other. Is this something that's conscious when you're writing, you know, that you find it cartoonish, that you find it worth sort of satirizing?
No, I actually just think about it as if guys are hanging out, this is going to happen. You know, that's the way I see it. I think of Ray hanging out with me and my friends, and whoever, and we got the leader, the guy who runs the group. You know, he's the guy that strangers will talk to first. You know, we get that, and then you got the followers. You know, the sheep, and then you got the ones that think for themselves, but they're too scared to be leaders. They don't know how to be. You know, and I just look at guys hanging out, and it's up to the reader to see if they're
even the way
if
you
they're
just
nice
said
guys or
hanging
they're
out.
assholes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. You know, and so there's another aspect of representation that I think that the series as a whole really handles well, and that's aging. You just simply don't see that in comics, you know, even though comics by their very nature are these long-running stories, you know, almost soap operatic. They're still to some degree static, right? That the characters and the situations and their environments are not allowed to change that much. You know, I remember there was a controversy a few years ago with DC Comics saying how they didn't want Batwoman, Kate Kane, to get married because marriage was such a big step in her life. You know, it's such a life-changing thing to be married, and that didn't jibe with, you know, the character that they created. And I think recently DC came up and sort of similar things where they tried to marry Bruce Wayne and Selena Kyle, and just said, you know, oh, never mind. And so, you know, I was wondering, you know, the series in some ways is about aging, right? When did you realize that was what you were doing? You know, when did you make the conscious decision to say, okay, these are no longer young people in the 80s punk scene. Right. These are women who were and men who are getting older and dealing with the problems that come with aging.
Yeah. It was from the very beginning, but it was Gilbert who kind of made it clear, because he liked the old comic strip Gasoline Alley, which starts about a man who finds a baby on his doorstep. Through the years, the baby grows up to be a boy, and then a grown man, and then the guy who found him is like an old man, you know, and he just thought that was really cool, and I did too. But the aging thing was mostly because ever since, even when I was like 6 years old, I was always thinking about the old days, even if, you know, remember when I was 4? You know, stuff like that. And me and my brothers would always talk about, yeah, I remember when we used to go to this uncle's house or this and that, and you know, and it was really just like 2 years ago, you know, but to us it was just like, those were the days, you know. And when the characters started to age, I realized that they had now they had a past. They had, so growing with them was kind of made them more human, made them, and so they could go back to their past. They could,
right.
You know, I love doing flashbacks.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, and I didn't think the aging thing would cause that, but it did. It was less like, oh my God, these characters are just becoming human, more human every time because they have a childhood. And almost you can tell there's a future coming, for some of them.
Do you find that once you sort of decided, that, I would age these characters, and that they would develop past, did you find that more stories opened up to you?
Sure.
Sure.
Like, I didn't know a lot of Maggie's childhood. It just came as I went along.
Yeah.
Like, I want to do one where she's 4, and her mom are hiding from a bill collector, and they go hide at the park, just stuff like that. And of course, then all my memories of me as a child just start pouring out and going, oh yeah, and then they go to the park and there's 2 dogs after having sex, their tails are tied together because they're stuck.
Yeah.
Just stuff like that I remember, that just come to me when I'm doing the children. I'm just remembering my childhood constantly, And then sometimes I don't tell the bad stuff. Sometimes I do.
It's funny. I mean, it's funny to me that when you age a character, you start thinking about their childhood. It seems counterintuitive, maybe, to say that, okay, these characters are getting older and dealing with the problems of age. Let's think about how they were as little kids.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And making them grow older sometimes can be hard because, I only have so many lines to draw. And a person going into their late 30s, you go, do I give them more lines or do I keep these lines? That was a hard thing. Now it's easier because Maggie's in her 50s and I have a better check on how she looks.
Yeah. It's interesting,
But that in between is kind of hard to draw if you're just doing black and white lines.
And even something like Maggie's hair, changes. Color throughout the series. Goes from blonde. I guess blonde. I mean, it's white.
Yeah, or it's brown, reddish brown, but I'm too lazy to put in hairline stuff.
So Love and Rockets has garnered this reputation for having this enormous cast, but the Love Bunglers and this new one, the focus has narrowed in some ways, right, to just sort of the core 3, right, the Hopey, Maggie, and Ray. Why, I guess, is my question.
For Love Bunglers, I thought I was spending too much time on the chase, and I thought, well, I'm going to give an ending for once. I always left things open. Nothing had an ending, and I thought, I'm going to give you an ending. And so it was a challenge to myself, like, can I handle it? And then can the readers handle it? We'll see, how I do this. And I was really happy with it. In a way, I did it so I put so much into the Love Bunglers that by the end, I say, okay, if I go outside tomorrow and get hit by a bus, I'm good. I said what I wanted to say.
Right.
And it could end right here. But then, of course, it's like the next day. Oh, maybe it's not so good. And so it starts to get more and more. This Maggie and Hopey reunion, this new book, without giving things away for people who haven't read it, it was a lot simpler story at the beginning, but Maggie has a tendency to take me places that I didn't plan. I never planned to make Maggie have a 100-page story, but she just takes it. She just takes me, and I can't stop.
Right. So both the Love Bunglers and this new one, and you touched on this before, rely or are structured around having sort of a current day storyline and use frequent flashbacks. I was wondering, like, what is the appeal of telling a story that way? By sort of constantly juxtaposing the past and the present.
Right. I guess it's being sentimental in a way, which a lot of artists cringe and run away from. But I've never been afraid of that. I don't mind just going into the deepest, like, sappiest stuff. But I can't remember the question.
Why flashbacks? Why use that as a storytelling device?
Right. I don't know. It just works. I think I learned it from Godfather Part 2. I really liked. You had the 50s.
Right.
Gangsters, and then you'd go back to 1916.
Okay.
And it was kind of like in that's the story A Christmas Carol, okay, where he's seeing his past, and then he says, it's Fezziwig, he's alive again. And I'm just like, I don't know who Fezziwig is, but obviously he made a big impact on this kid when he was a kid. And I was like that. It's just kind of like there's my Theo Lalo, in his backyard raising chickens. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that stuff just moves me. I'm just a sap for that kind of thing. But I keep in mind that maybe not so many readers are that way, and so I try to give you enough without clobbering you over the head, until it was the Love Bunglers. Love Bunglers, I didn't care. This one, I said, I'm going to clobber you over the head so hard, and you're going to like this.
Right.
And it worked out.
Yeah. Do you find that you are like consciously trying to tie what's happened in a character's past to their present, or do you just let the past be the past by itself, just let it sit there for the audience or sit there for the reader, or is there any, like, do you consciously try to connect it to what's going on in the present?
In a way, sometimes I just like to show things that I didn't show early on. Like in this new book, there's flashbacks of since it's a punk reunion, I go back to their punk days. There were certain things I never told that I always had in my head of their hanging out and stuff. And so I just wanted to show it. And so the flashbacks are almost like not even connected to the present, yet they're there, and they are there.
Right.
And it is them,
Yeah. So I guess this is my last question because I want to leave room for everyone else. But is it fun for you to revisit these characters in modern contexts? Like there's one scene when in the new one, and not giving anything away here, when they're going to this sort of punk rock reunion show, and they're both really looking forward to it. And then at some point, Maggie steps outside and just goes on her phone and texts Ray, because she's bored. She's sort of in the way that we often, even in places where we actually want to be, we'll sort of, what's going on my phone. Is it fun for you to try to figure out, like, how would these characters that, I've been with since 1981, how do they text?
Right.
Or how do they inhabit, the 2018 world?
It's not that hard because they're growing old with me. Whatever I'm up to, I kind of put
Right.
stuff. You know, I find myself on the phone a lot, and I'm like, what did I do before this? You know?
Yeah, right?
Yeah. And so I as a kind of joke, like, oh, these punky rebel girls, look, they're on their phones. You know, there's a scene in it, not giving it away, but where they're taking the train to go to Hoppers to go to the shows, and they're sitting there not talking. They're just looking at their phones.
Right.
And I just find that kind of funny and silly, and because it's what I do.
Right.
You know?
I mean, like, I've been to get-togethers with good friends, you know, who I've always had things to talk about with. And it'll essentially be, you know, the half dozen of us sort of sitting around on our phones and, you know, individually, and then, you know, pick our head up, you know.
And then like 5 minutes before, you were like, look at that table over there. That couple's not talking. They're just on their phones.
Right.
They're ignoring each other. And then 5 minutes later, you're going, oh.
Right. Yes. Okay, so I'd like to open it up to questions.
We have a standing mic over here for anyone who has a question. I have one. Jaime, I love your work. Big fan. Been a fan for years. And I'm also a comic artist myself, but I'm having a hard time getting off the launch pad, mostly because I just get stuck in my head a lot. I was just wondering, how often do the words come to you first? And how often do the images come to you first? Or is it the same every time? Do you get these like pictures interspersed with nothingness and you have to fill it in? Could you offer some insight? Sometimes
it's just I start writing a dialogue between two people.
Yeah.
And they're talking about anything, but they're talking, and then I go, oh, this could be this character and this character. Oh, a story about these two characters. That'd be interesting. You know, sometimes it turns that way, and then by the time the story is done, none of that first dialogue was in it. It just sparked the idea of like, hey, I've never made these two characters talk before. This will be interesting. How would they talk to each other? You know, oh, they don't really know each other, so they kind of, one would be kind of like guarded, you know, just things like that. Sometimes, a lot of times, it's just like I want to make Maggie all bundled up out in the cold. Okay, so I go, okay, so this story is happening in a cold weather, you know, just simple like that, and then it starts to gel.
Yeah.
But another thing is when I'm picturing what's going on the page, I never think of a comic. I always think of a movie, or a real life movement, and then I have to make those dumb lines on paper translate what I'm thinking, you know, and so it's a lot of different things. I don't work. I don't have a formula of how I get things done. It's almost like, look, I'm not really a fast artist, but I do a regular comic, or basic regular comic. So I can't wait for this one favorite character to give me a story. I have to say, who's got one for me? Because I can't wait.
Yeah.
I can't wait. Oh, Hopey always writes her own story. Okay, Hopey, you got the lead. And then I'm like writing it, and then I'm like, wow, this doesn't sound like Hopey. Hey, what if it's Maggie? Okay, now she's not so brave in this, so she would say no instead of yes in this situation. And yeah, anyway, it's my head's going this way. That's why I could never be a teacher, because I'm there going like I am right now, just like, and then the head, and then Maggie would say no, and the students are just like, or on their phones. You know.
There you go. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I couldn't be more helpful.
No, that was super helpful. Thank you. Oh, here, why don't I just pass it around? There you go.
It seems like you still, after all these years, love your characters. has there ever been a point over the years that you became resentful of them and thought, oh, I'm stuck with these guys forever, I really want to do this other project or anything like that?
Whenever I think that, I just jump to another character till I like that other character again. Like, recently I had real trouble writing Hopey because she used to be so easy to write. She was just a fireball, just whatever she says works. Then her life started to change, and she started to really change, though. I mean, from the old Hopey to the new Hopey, like more responsible adult, and it's not that I didn't like that she was changing, but I didn't like the way I was making her change. And so I was like, I don't like Hopey right now, So I should just leave her alone right now till there's a story she fits in, because I think I'm forcing it. I think I'm forcing her to grow up maybe too fast or just grow up, period, and it's not working. So that's basically.
Was there ever a time where you thought about doing one story with your brother's characters and him doing one with yours?
We did that once.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How did that work out?
Gilbert had a ball. I was kind of scratching my my head. I was afraid to draw his characters. But, yeah, we did that.
Got one over here.
Hi. I'm a huge fan of the series, and you have such just amazing control over just allowing us to get like deep into these relationships, and it's weird, and I've reread the series, a couple of times, and it's weird. You kind of notice at a certain point, Maggie and Hopey are at the center, and then there's certain stretches. I mean, it's like different when you're reading it all at once, and I imagine, stretched out over decades. It's weird. They're kind of like separated for long stretches of time, and in between, I feel like a lot of the other characters on the periphery, a lot of times when they hang out, they reference this relationship between them, and it's a subject of a lot of gossip and everything, and it becomes this intense thing. And then at a certain point, especially with Love Bunglers, which I love that because there's, at the end there's this page of, it shows like just the single panels with her and Ray's history, which I that was amazing. It was beautiful. But then you see the power of that relationship too, which, Ray's kind of like a frustrating character, like you were talking about, because he's like a dude, But they seem to have a very strong connection too, especially reinforced by the Love Bunglers. And I've read a little bit of the new story. I feel like there's a lot of talk from the other characters about how Maggie and Hopey have this kind of destructive relationship where they kind of push each other into these roles, and especially, where they say that Maggie is kind of like, I don't know, a tease for Hopey, and that whenever she's around, it's kind of like Hopey's trying to settle down, and Maggie's still kind of like a little bit like unsettled and wants to kind of delve back into these punk roots. Do you feel like their relationship is like they keep being drawn together for a reason, or is it sort of like she has maybe a better relationship with Ray, and that's kind of the center of the story you're trying to tell?
I don't know. It just kind of happens, When I bring them together, it's because I want to see what they're going to do, because they're such strong forces that sometimes it doesn't work, and I let it run its course, and I don't know, with Maggie and Ray, it was more, I was thinking of a happy ending. I just thought the chase had been going on since issue 20 of the original series, and I just thought, well, I'm going to give myself a bone and everyone else. That's the way I handle that. But with Maggie and Hopey, it's more like, I want to see what they'll do because they can just totally eat up the universe, and teach me a few things, because I like to draw this comic like I'm reading it for the first time, like I don't want just the readers to have fun. I like to surprise myself and see what this character thinks and this and that, and from what I've been saying about the characters, you can tell they write themselves. I mean, that I can't, they're out of my control. And when I try to step in, it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have stepped in. Maybe I should let it just happen. And I don't know. It doesn't always. It's not always successful, but it's kind of like a situation in your life where something wasn't successful, but you have to go to work the next day, and that's the way I treat it. Like I don't know. You think it's the end, but it's never the end. They're still alive, I don't know.
Thank you.
I have a question, actually. Do you see Ray as a kind of Greek chorus type character where it's, there is such an intimacy between Maggie and Hopey, right? And the intimacy can oftentimes be impenetrable, for someone looking in, as the reader is always doing. The reader is always sort of looking at them, from the outside. And in many ways, Ray is too. Ray, over and over again, I think even in this new one, Ray sort of mentions how Hopey's the one, I'll never understand what they have, and I don't think I can fathom the meaningfulness that these two share ever. Yeah. Do you find that that character is kind of an audience surrogate or like a you surrogate?
Well, Ray was originally created because I needed a male Maggie. Maggie had all my thoughts, and I wanted the guy who could use the urinal, so someone who could, so I thought, I wanted to create Ray for just remembering my teenage years, hanging out with the bros, stuff like that. But Ray, I don't know. He's just the third person to throw a wrench into the works, but I've experienced this before with friends, is that he knows that no matter if he and Maggie die together, he knows that he will never have that moment that they had, and it gnaws at him that he cannot be part of that one special, really special time in her life, and I've been through that, with friends and different people, and I think it's a good dramatic device.
Hi. You touched on this a little, but I was wondering how much you sort of plan out in advance where a story is going to go versus how much you figure it out as you're going, and how you sort of strike that balance between keeping it surprising and fresh for yourself while at the same time making sure it doesn't just sort of go wherever. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I never write a whole story at once. I never. If I do, it's changed by the time it's done, because I want to constantly surprise myself, and not with like shocking things like, well, guess what? Oh, now the car drives off the cliff, and then I go, hey, if the car did drive off the cliff, that might work, But Yeah, I have rarely had a story that went from start to finish thought out before I put it on the page, because I want to have fun like you guys. You know, I want to be drawing it, going, I can't believe she said that, you know, or you know, something like that, because it just keeps me from being bored. If I wrote something from beginning to end like a script, and then it was time to draw it, I wouldn't want to draw it because it's done. It's written, you know. Like I said, I want to have fun. I want to be surprised. I want to be on this journey with everybody else. You know.
Got time for a couple more questions?
40 years is a long time to be doing anything, but do you have any particular regrets with decisions you've made with certain characters over the years, of like what has happened to them, characters you'd like to bring back, or that you can't handle in a flashback?
Right. Sure. I can't think of off the top of my head, but yeah, I have regrets, but not a lot, because it always works itself out. I don't know. Like I said, I've got that thing where I know how to fix mistakes and make them seem like the great American novel. You know, I just have that. I just have a knack for that, and I rely on that. And so if I have regrets, I fix it. I disguised as something else, like, oh, I used to like the way this character was, but now they've kind of gone on a different path that I'm kind of not that interested in where they're going. So that character will disappear for a while because I have no stories for them. I create a new character to fill that spark, that made the character. But it's not like I just draw another person with black hair instead of blonde hair. I disguise it, but to keep that spark that I really liked in a character, I kind of move it around with my universe.
First, I just really want to say thank you, and that I can't imagine my life without your work. And one thing that kind of fascinates me is that you created this really unique career for yourself from a quite young age, and this is basically the only career that you've ever known. And I would love to hear a little bit about how you actually do it. Do you work on Love and Rockets 5 days a week for 8 hours a day? Do you forget about them for weeks at a time? Do you give yourself vacations? Do you think about them 12 hours a day? Or I just have no idea how you actually make it all happen.
It's supposed to be that when I finish one, I start the next. It's not always that way. I'll say, okay, I'll get to it tomorrow, and then I realize 2 weeks have passed, and I'm like, God, I spent all that time taking out the trash, So it's I don't know. I can't stay on a schedule because I get bored. It has to naturally come to me, or it works or it doesn't work, or sometimes that takes too long. That's why I said earlier, then I'll say, oh shit, this isn't working. Okay, this character's really easy to do. I'll do a fast 4-page fun story about this character. It's like, who's got a story for me, because I can't wait. But if I just tried to work on that great 100-page story, that I'm going to finish next month, that's impossible for me. I can't just I can't make myself do it. I can't make myself think I'm going to finish 100 pages in this amount of time. I just can't, and I don't let it kill me. But I even if I try to do something regular, I'm not gonna let my stuff be driven by a calendar, even if I'm supposed to. It just doesn't work for me. But luckily, I've been putting out a comic pretty regular for all these years. Maybe it could have come out a little faster, but but I don't think so.
We have 2 more questions, and then that is it before the signing.
Hi. So, in the early Love and Rockets, there was a lot of sci-fi elements that were put into there. Like you'd have Maggie fixing rockets, as the title suggests, and seeing dinosaurs, all of these really fantastical elements. But that slowly disappeared throughout the series. So I was wondering is there any reason for that, or was it just you just didn't want to write more grounded stories, or did it just?
When I was saying earlier that when we started the comic, we threw our whole life into it. You got your whole life to do your first album, 6 months to do your second, or whatever. And so we just threw everything in. I like drawing rocket ships. I like drawing robots, dinosaurs. I like this and that. I love that. So I was just throwing everything in there. And when we would show friends, what do you think? I made a comic. Hey. And then a friend would go, ooh, I like the homeboy with the bandana. And I go, that was just a drawing in the background, but that's what he related to. And I go, well, yeah, so do I. And then I started to realize that hey, real life's better. I grew up, I grew up in this fun, really amazing punk world, but before that, I hung out with and cruised on Sunday nights, and did the whole homeboy thing. And that was just so much fun and so rich and so just like I was saying, that we had an open canvas to do anything. The more the dinosaurs started to get in the way of that. It started okay, I've got Maggie and Hopey's friends are in a band, or they got gangsters in their block, well, you're not going to care if a guy's going to be knifed if there's a dinosaur walking by, and so it just they got in the way. The more I put the little personal, realistic touches in it, the more I wanted to do them. There's, if you see the early stories, Maggie's off on a big adventure. Then I go home. And the band's practicing, and I'm really into it. And I go, they get 3 panels out of 100 panels. I want to draw that. I don't want to draw the other thing. So that's basically what happened. But in the current regular series, before the stuff's collected, I make sure I have my Maggie and Hopey world that's really bogged down in continuity and real life as much as I can do it. But I always have a side story of a silly science fiction story that's just flexing my muscles because I need that release now, because sometimes the Maggie and Hopey world, as much as I'm happy with the way it turns out, just gets me so bogged down in this where I can't go anywhere. I can't go anywhere but real life. And so I have these side stories of oh, the space woman, she sucks your blood, and it's just a good release, it just,
We got one last question over here.
Hi, how are you? I was curious to know, what has the reaction from the Latin community been like from the 80s up until now, since it's been 40 years? Because growing up, I discovered your series in the late 80s when I was allowed to read comics. My mother reading comics when she was young, but felt the content was a little too mature for me at the time. So, and that I wouldn't really understand components, especially everything we watched that was not cartoons was very negative about the Latin community, right? Drug dealers abusing their wives, screaming, things like that. So has the reaction as younger Latin people start reading your series changed at all? Has it evolved? Do you see that they're still reacting the same way they did when they first discovered you back in the 80s?
I'm not sure, but the way I saw it, the way I witnessed it, was in the beginning doing these stories about Latinos, and then the guys cruising and hanging out and this and that, and as I was doing it, I didn't know who I was reaching, because what I was seeing, I was going to comic book conventions, and that was the only time I would see my fans, and it was usually white people, mostly. It wasn't really till the 90s where I would be approached by a Latino, and they'd go man, I've been reading you forever. Oh man, this just changed my world and stuff like that. I'm like, where were you, man? Yeah, and then now I've just learned all this this readership that I have from all sides, that I'm able to now understand and know who I'm talking to, which is pretty cool. But in the beginning, I could only meet people who approached me at a comic book convention. So we were kind of alone, drawing our comic, going, who's out there?
Well, Michelle, Jaime, thank you so much for having this conversation with us tonight.